I remember the exact moment she noticed me. The cafe was half empty, the kind of late afternoon lull where the clink of spoons against mugs and the low hum of conversation felt like a secret soundtrack. I'd been hunched over my laptop, fingers paused on the keyboard, staring at a blank screen that somehow felt like it mirrored my own indecision. And then she walked in. She moved with the kind of confidence that made the air shift without trying. Mid-40s, hair catching the sunlight through the tall windows, coat slung over one arm, a bag dangling carelessly from her shoulder. She ordered her coffee in a low, calm voice that made the barista glance at her twice, as though she just whispered a secret the world needed to hear. I tried not to look, tried to bury myself in my work, but her presence was a gentle weight pressing against the edges of my awareness. I caught her eyes briefly, startlingly green, as she scanned the room. And for a heartbeat, our gazes locked. She looked past the screen, past the laptop, right at me, and in that fraction of a second, the quiet hum of the cafe became a spotlight. I don't know what made me speak. Maybe it was the way her lips curved ever so slightly, or the subtle tension in her posture, the way she held herself like she was carrying a storm she didn't quite want anyone to see. "You're working hard?" I blurted, instantly hating how stupid it sounded. She tilted her head, like she was studying a painting, not me. "Hard?" Her voice was soft, teasing, yet there was something in it that made me feel like she could see every corner of my soul. "Maybe. Depends on your definition of hard." I laughed nervously, sliding my laptop closed as if that could somehow make me less obvious. "I guess I just notice things." "Notice things, huh?" She leaned slightly forward, and suddenly the space between us shrank enough that I could see the tiny flecks of gold in her eyes. My chest did that stupid, racing thing, like it hadn't been used in years. She smiled faintly, knowingly. "Not like the others, are you?" The words hit me like a soft jolt. Not like the others. I didn't even know what that meant, but I wanted it to mean something. Something only we could understand. I cleared my throat, trying to regain composure, but she didn't let me off the hook. She stayed close, just close enough that I felt the warmth radiating from her, smelled the faint trace of her perfume, subtle, almost cinnamon, a scent that felt like it belonged in a memory I hadn't had yet. I wanted to say something clever, something that would make her laugh or at least not see how completely flustered I was, but the words tangled in my throat. So I just nodded. She laughed softly, a sound that made the edges of my nerves loosen. "I like that," she said, almost to herself. Then she straightened, picking up her coffee, but I noticed she didn't move far. Her presence lingered like a promise I wasn't ready to touch. For a moment, everything was quiet again, the quiet before the storm. And I realized I was holding my breath, waiting for something I didn't know existed until now. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned slightly, and I could see the subtle shift in her expression. Something about it tightened her shoulders, something about it made her hesitate. She looked back at me, eyes holding mine longer than necessary. And just as she was about to speak again, the bell above the cafe door jingled. Another customer, maybe. But my chest sank because in that moment, I had the sudden, unreasonable feeling that whatever interruption came next could change everything. She leaned in close, just enough that my world narrowed to the curve of her smile, and whispered, almost conspiratorially, "You're not like the others, are you?" And that was it. Everything tilted. I didn't know if I was ready, but I knew I wasn't leaving. I couldn't stop thinking about her after that cafe encounter. The way her eyes had caught mine, the almost imperceptible tremor in her smile, it haunted the quiet moments of my day. I told myself it was just curiosity, admiration, maybe even a fleeting crush. But every time I replayed it in my head, it felt heavier, like the air itself had changed. I knew I shouldn't be drawn to her. She was older, not by a little, but by enough to make the idea dangerous. Not in some dramatic, movie way, no, the danger was subtle, quiet, almost unbearably human. She carried a life, a history I couldn't even guess at. I imagined heartbreaks tucked behind the slight crease near her eyes, regrets folded into the corners of her lips, Maybe even someone she loved and lost years ago. And me? I was 24, still fumbling through first jobs, first heartbreaks, first real responsibilities. I kept seeing her in my mind's eye. At her office, a corner of her apartment, walking along streets drenched in late afternoon sunlight. I started noticing details I hadn't before. The soft way she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, the faint, almost imperceptible clench of her jaw when she laughed too loudly, the way her hands lingered on the edge of a counter as if afraid to fully leave it. It wasn't just attraction. There was something fragile beneath her poise, a vulnerability she tried to hide. And I knew, absurdly, that she could see through me, too. I couldn't pretend I was just another young man passing through her life. Not with the way my thoughts kept straying, not with the way my stomach twisted every time she smiled or tilted her head, as though I had stumbled into a secret world I wasn't allowed to enter. And yet, the risk made it sweeter, sharper. Part of me thrilled in the taboo, the age difference, the unspoken power she held, the whispered understanding that nothing about this was simple. I imagined conversations that might never happen, moments never shared, memories yet to be made. I felt that pull in my chest, a mix of longing and hesitation, like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall could hurt but feeling the wind insist you try. I found myself at the cafe again the next afternoon, pretending to work while stealing glances toward the door. And there she was, coat draped over her arm, eyes scanning the room with that same quiet command that made my heart thud like a drum in my chest. She caught my gaze and didn't look away. This time, our interaction was quieter. We talked about nothing, the coffee, the weather, a fleeting joke about a book neither of us had read. And yet, the air between us was charged, taut with words unspoken, with histories that would never fully align but somehow fit anyway. At one point, she brushed her hand against mine while reaching for sugar. The contact was brief, almost accidental. But I felt it deep in my chest, an electric tremor that made me forget everything else. Her eyes met mine again, and in that moment, for a fleeting heartbeat, we didn't need words. It was risky, yes. Taboo, even. But standing there, fingers lingering near each other, I realized that maybe some risks were worth taking. Maybe some sparks, once felt, refused to die. And as she laughed softly at something I said, I knew, absurdly, that I would wait, however long it took, for the next time she leaned in close. The day she invited me to her gallery opening should have been simple. Public, casual, nothing that could get either of us in trouble. Or so I told myself as I adjusted my tie for the third time in the mirror, hands trembling slightly. I didn't want to look too eager, too young, too obvious. When I arrived, she was already there, talking to a couple of patrons. She wore a dress that caught the light in all the right ways, subtle, elegant, dangerous. My chest tightened. I wanted to walk away, make a joke about being late, but I couldn't. Not when she glanced at me across the room, that half-smile that made everything around us blur. We circulated among the art, small talk about brush strokes and colors, but every word felt like a pretense. Every glance felt like an unspoken confession. Then, someone I didn't expect arrived, her ex-husband. He moved through the crowd with a practiced charm, and my stomach sank as I realized he wasn't just there for the art. He wanted her attention. I watched her stiffen, a subtle shift in her posture, the soft bite of her lip. I felt suddenly invisible and unbearably exposed, like a boy intruding where he shouldn't belong. But then she leaned toward me, her hand brushing mine on the table, just enough to make my pulse race. "Don't let him see you like this," she murmured, almost teasing, almost warning. We wandered to a quieter corner, and the air between us thickened. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled in my throat. My mind replayed the brush of her fingers, the warmth that lingered even after she pulled away. I realized how reckless this was, how impossible it should be, and yet I couldn't leave. Why are you looking at me like that?" I asked finally. Her eyes flicked to mine, then away, then back. The room felt suddenly smaller, as though everyone else had disappeared. "Because you're not like them," she said, almost too softly to hear. Her hand lingered near mine again, and I felt my body lean in without permission. The ex-husband moved closer, and she stiffened. I should. She started, then stopped herself. Her voice caught, a faint tremor I almost missed. I realized then that she wasn't just fighting me. She was fighting a life, a history, a set of expectations I had no right to penetrate. I wanted to pull away, to be rational, to step back and remind myself of the absurdity of this. But the magnetic pull between us was impossible to deny. My fingers brushed hers again, and our eyes locked, holding a silent conversation that neither dared speak aloud. And then, almost instinctively, we leaned toward each other. Close enough to feel the warmth of breath, the faint scent of her perfume. I could taste the hesitation, the longing, the danger. I wanted to close the gap, to let it happen, to kiss her, but the thought of being seen, of ruining everything, froze me. She hesitated too, a flicker of panic in her green eyes. Her hand lingered for a heartbeat, then she stepped back, just enough to create space, just enough to remind me, and herself, that this was reckless, that someone could see, that the world would judge. And yet, even as she pulled away, our fingers still hovered near each other, suspended in the air like a promise either of us could deny. The gallery buzzed around us, but in that quiet, suspended moment, I realized we were already entwined, caught between desire, guilt, and the impossible pull we couldn't resist. The tension between us had been simmering for days, subtle sparks in every glance, every accidental touch. But tonight, it became unbearable. She invited me to her apartment under the pretense of talking about the exhibition, though the way she said it made my chest tighten as if I'd been caught trespassing somewhere sacred. When I arrived, the door opened before I could knock. She stood there, coat hanging from her arm, eyes sharper than ever. There was an edge to her tonight, something I hadn't seen before, maybe exhaustion, maybe frustration, or maybe desire that had finally found a way to press against the surface. "Come in," she said, voice calm, but her fingers fidgeted with the strap of her bag. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and vanilla. Books were stacked unevenly on the table. The soft glow of a lamp cast half her face in shadow. She moved past me, shoulders slightly tense, and I noticed the faint tremor in her hands as she set her coffee down. I wanted to reach for her, to steady her, to make her laugh like nothing else mattered. But I hesitated. The age difference, the risks, the unspoken rules, all of it loomed between us. I tried to speak, but the words stuck, useless against the gravity of what was building. "Why are you here?" she asked suddenly, voice low, almost challenging. "Why are you really here?" Her question hit me like a punch. I wanted to be honest. I wanted to say, I can't stop thinking about you. I don't care about the consequences. I want you. But I swallowed it down. Instead, I said, "I don't know. Maybe because I'm curious." She laughed, a sound sharp with tension. "Curious? That's it. You're 24. You don't even know what you want yet." I flinched, but not entirely from her words. There was fire in her gaze, a raw intensity that made my chest ache. I could see all the walls she built around herself, and I wanted to tear them down. I wanted her to fall into me, even if only for a heartbeat. Then it happened. The ex-husband's name came up, in passing, a detail about a work event. Her face hardened. I noticed the way her jaw clenched, the flash of jealousy that she didn't try to hide. My pulse surged. I wanted to say something. "I'm here. I see you. I'm not him." But my throat tightened. She moved closer, eyes searching mine, as if daring me to cross a line neither of us had permission to touch. The room felt impossibly small. The air heavy. Every second stretched, taut with all the things we couldn't say aloud. And then she paused, just a step away, her hand brushing mine, deliberately this time. My fingers tingled at the contact. I could feel her hesitation, her desire, the fear that she would pull back if we went too far. Her eyes dropped for a moment, and I caught the tremble in her lip. My own breath hitched. I wanted to close the distance, to let her know, without words, that I wasn't leaving. That I could be the one she didn't know she was waiting for. But before I could move, she stepped back slightly, shaking her head as if to ward off what she herself wanted. I shouldn't, she whispered, and I saw the conflict warring behind her eyes. And just like that, the moment hung suspended, impossible, electric, inevitable. I knew one decision, one movement, and nothing would ever be the same. I thought tonight would be quiet, private, the kind of night where we could linger in the tension between us without consequence. I was wrong. I arrived at her apartment, heart already drumming in anticipation, only to find her standing by the door, pale and rigid. Her eyes weren't on me, they were fixed on something behind me. What? I started, but before I could finish, her voice cut through me like a blade. You shouldn't be here. Confused, I glanced over my shoulder. My roommate, who I'd never mentioned visiting this part of town, stood awkwardly in the hall, fumbling with his phone. I didn't think anyone was home, he mumbled, clearly realizing he'd interrupted something he wasn't meant to see. Her face tightened, lips pressed together, and in that instant, I saw it, the raw, dangerous vulnerability I hadn't anticipated. Her hands shook slightly, the kind of tremble that only comes when someone is fighting between desire and self-preservation. I told you, she said softly, almost to herself. This isn't safe. I stepped closer, trying to close the distance, but she lifted a hand, palm outward, stopping me. Not here. Not now. I wanted to protest, to tell her it was fine, that I could leave, that nothing mattered except this moment. But something in her tone, sharp, trembling, real, made me hesitate. Then it hit me, the gallery, the ex-husband, the casual mentions of work events, none of it was just context. There were consequences I hadn't fully understood. And the room seemed suddenly too small, every shadow stretched long and accusing. My roommate, oblivious to the depth of the moment, muttered something about leaving, and I nodded, heart sinking. The door closed behind him, leaving us alone again, but the shift was permanent. That interruption had splintered the fragile cocoon we were building. She turned to me, eyes glistening in the low light. You don't understand what I have to lose, she whispered. Everything could be ruined, if anyone knew. I swallowed hard, the weight of her words anchoring me. I'd been so caught up in the pull between us that I hadn't considered the stakes. Her life, her reputation, the carefully balanced walls she'd built around herself. I was suddenly painfully aware of the risk I'd almost walked into blindly. I'm not leaving, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I can wait. No, don't say that. She interrupted, voice tight, trembling with something I couldn't name, fear, desire, desperation. She stepped back, as if distance could protect her from what she wanted most. I can't risk us. Not yet. Maybe never. Her words, whispered, fragmented, hung in the air between us. Every nerve in my body ached to reach for her, to close the gap, to defy the rules she was bound by. But I also saw the truth behind them. She wasn't pushing me away because she didn't want me. She was protecting herself from a world that wouldn't forgive what we were building. And just like that, the impossible tension doubled. Desire clashed with fear. Hope tangled with reality. And I knew one wrong move, one misstep, could shatter everything we were just beginning to risk. But I couldn't stop thinking about her. Not then. Not ever. The apartment was quiet, but not peaceful. Every shadow seemed to hum with what we hadn't said, every breath heavy with the weight of things we'd been pretending didn't exist. She sat on the edge of the couch, fingers twisting the edge of her scarf, eyes downcast. I could feel the tremor in her hands from across the room, and for a moment, I just watched her, wondering how someone could be so impossibly beautiful and fragile at the same time. I shouldn't have let it go this far, she whispered finally. Her voice cracked, a sound I would never forget. I should have stopped this before it started. I took a cautious step toward her. You didn't stop it, I said softly. And neither did I. That means something. Doesn't it? She flinched, eyes snapping up to meet mine. The conflict in them was raw, desire tangled with fear, longing tangled with self-preservation. I wanted to cross the room in one stride, take her hand, pull her close, and tell her everything I'd been too afraid to say. But instead I let myself pause, let her make the choice. "I'm scared," she admitted, almost a whisper. Her lips quivered slightly. "I've made mistakes. I've hurt people I cared about. I can't handle losing myself again." I nodded, understanding more than I had words for. "You're not losing yourself," I said. "Not with me. I don't want to take you from yourself. I want to be with you. If you'll let me." She studied me, and in that long, tense silence, I saw the fight inside her, between the wall she'd built and the pull she couldn't resist. And then, slowly, deliberately, she reached for my hand. Not a fleeting touch, not a careful brush, but a deliberate hold. Her fingers curled around mine like she was testing if I'd run, if I'd break. "I don't know if this is right," she admitted, voice trembling. "I don't know if it ever could be. Right or wrong doesn't matter," I said. "I just know that I can't walk away from this. From you." Her chest rose and fell, a shiver running through her. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between us, the electricity in our fingers, the heat of her gaze, the impossibility of it all. And then, slowly, impossibly, she leaned closer, so close I could feel her breath on my lips, warm and real. We didn't kiss yet. Not fully. But the space between us vibrated with promise, tension, and all the words we hadn't dared speak. It was messy, it was fragile, and it was real. Everything we'd feared, every risk, every stolen glance, every unsaid confession, it had led us here. Finally, she pulled back slightly, resting her forehead against mine. Maybe we'll figure it out," she whispered. "Together." I nodded, heart hammering. "Together," I repeated, knowing it was a beginning, not an ending. The night stretched ahead, uncertain, messy, but ours. And though we hadn't crossed the final line, we didn't need to. For the first time, we understood each other completely. The city outside hummed softly, unaware of the small revolution happening in that quiet apartment. And I realized that sometimes, just understanding, just daring to stay, was enough to rewrite everything. Morning light seeped through the thin curtains, painting soft gold across the apartment. I woke to find her already awake, sitting on the edge of the couch, a cup of coffee in her hands, steam curling lazily into the air. She didn't look at me at first, just stared out the window, fingers tracing the rim of her mug as if it held the answers to questions she hadn't asked aloud. I watched her quietly, heart full of things I didn't know how to say. The tension from last night lingered, a delicate thread binding us. But it wasn't heavy this time. It was something quieter, warmer, a sense of possibility, of understanding, of shared risk. "You're awake," she said softly, not turning to look at me. Her voice carried the faintest tremor, the echo of last night's confession. "I am," I said, moving closer. "And I'm not going anywhere." She finally met my gaze, and I saw it there, a mixture of relief and fear, longing and hesitation, all tangled up with the hope that maybe, finally, she could let someone in. I wanted to reach for her, to bridge the gap between hesitation and certainty, but I let her lead, letting the fragile trust we'd built grow just a little more. "I've been thinking," she admitted, "about how reckless this all feels. How wrong it could be." She paused, eyes tracing the patterns of light on the floor. "But it also feels right. In a way I didn't expect." I smiled gently, heart hammering. "Sometimes right feels scary. But it doesn't have to be dangerous." "Not with me." She laughed softly, a sound that eased some of the tension that had held us in check for weeks. "You really are different," she said, and for the first time, it sounded like more than a comment, like an acknowledgement of what we'd become together, messy and real. We didn't need to rush. There were no grand gestures, no cinematic confessions. Just the quiet understanding that we were here, together, willing to navigate the impossible pull that had drawn us to each other. She reached for my hand again, fingers curling into mine with the ease of someone reclaiming something they'd almost forgotten they needed. Outside, the city hummed as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Every stolen glance, every whispered conversation, every moment of doubt and desire had led us here, not to perfection, but to honesty. And sometimes honesty is all love asks for. She took a slow sip of coffee, then set the cup down. I don't know what comes next, she admitted, eyes searching mine for reassurance. We figure it out, I said. Step by step. No promises, just together. Her lips curved into a small, tentative smile. Together, she echoed, and in that word, in that moment, the past and the fears melted just enough to let something fragile and beautiful take root. The morning stretched ahead, uncertain, messy, but ours. And for the first time, it felt possible to take risks, to be honest, to care without apology. Sometimes love isn't about certainty. Sometimes it's about showing up, even when the world says you shouldn't. And I realized, as I brushed a strand of hair from her face, that was enough.